You're not going to get out ahead.
How about you guys? Any movement on the baptism yet?
I think we're about to get started. The meeting minutes from our last week's meeting are available online. And I would encourage, if to the extent people can't make meetings, to really take a moment, a couple moments in fact, to look at the prior week's work or a week's work if you've been away, plural, more than 1 week. It's probably the best way to catch up. I'm sorry we don't have written meeting minutes, but I think this is a pretty convenient way for people to stay current on what this group has been talking about. So please take advantage of that methodology, and if anyone doesn't know how to access the multiple means of communication that are arrayed around the back of the room here, I think Shana can make those sources available to you if you don't already know how to access that information. But thank you for being here again this evening. Tonight, I didn't really prepare an agenda for this evening, a formal agenda as we've been doing in weeks past, and we've had the benefit of hearing most recently from folks in the community last week and from some of the organizations the week before that are supporting Ellicott City downtown and watershed area, to be a little less specific about the area that we're discussing. But tonight, I thought it'd be great if we could bring in a group or a couple of people, and we're very fortunate to get Odette Ramos to join us, who oversees an organization that I think is an umbrella group of community development corporations here in the state of Maryland, to share some of her perspectives, both from an operational, financing standpoint of what CDCs do. Probably starting there would be a great point of departure, and I think we're all eager to learn about CDCs. There are really people in the room, including myself, that have a background in running a CDC or perhaps even interacting with the CDC regularly, but it would be wonderful just to get some background about what those organizations do and how they might be useful. In fact, we decide to pursue that approach in the city.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Why don't we start?
That would be great.
I'm Mike Smith. I'm chair of the committee. I live here in the Ellicott City downtown area.
Okay, great.
Carrie Lee, I'm a community resident.
Great.
I'm Chris Gallant, live in Columbia, alternative capital funding.
Nat Alston, live in Columbia, and I'm president of the Horizons Group of Human Capital Consulting.
Nick Redding, I'm the executive director of Preservation Management.
Brooke Abercrombie, Deputy Director of Howard Eco Works, and I also live in Ellicott City, further west.
Gary Long, resident in Ellicott City, former urban designer.
Simon Cortez, I'm a business owner and property owner on Main Street.
Angie Dursigel, I'm also a business owner and property owner on Main Street, and I live in this district.
Matt Fleming, I'm the president of the Ellicott City Partnership, and I'm a resident.
Charles Schuyler, resident, Sword District.
Hi, Thea Lewis. I work on Main Street and I live in Shana Hernandez, Senior Advisor for Policy for County Executive Element.
Great, nice to meet all of you. Certainly undertaking a massive project in working on Ellicott City. Obviously, all of us, I live in Baltimore City, and obviously the whole state was really heartbroken as to what was happening in Ellicott City. So it's really actually, when Shana asked me to come in, I thought, well, yeah, if there's any possible way I can be helpful, that would be great. So I'm Odette Ramos. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Development Network of Maryland. The Community Development Network is a nonprofit that works with community development organizations across the state. So we'll get into some of those in terms of the background. But I've lived in Baltimore City since '95 when I came to Maryland to go to Gaffer College. I went to Rutgers for graduate school, but then had to come back. And I've been in the nonprofit world for a while, worked in at Senator Mikulski's office as well back in the day. Have been doing this for about 6 years in this job, but prior to that I was consulting and working with community development nonprofits across the state to help them be more efficient and effective. So just some basics. You'll hear me say community development organization as opposed to community development corporation, and that's very purposeful because there is an actual HUD definition for a community development corporation, and that has everything to do with housing, it has everything to do with owning property, and not every community development organization does those two things, okay? The way that we define a community development organization is a nonprofit that does the work of community development in communities. So that could actually range in a lot of ways. It depends on what the community needs. Typically, it could be anywhere from community organizing. Some community development organizations do own property, whether it's commercial or residential, for the purpose of redevelopment. A lot of times they are actually facilitating redevelopment and working on those partnerships to be able to bring development into a specific area. Some of them manage the main streets and so are able to work not only on the residential side but also on the commercial side. Some of them also provide basic services like food kitchens and pantries. Some of them do the home ownership counseling so that people can get whatever sorts of benefits to be able to own property and own a home. So what these groups do is really figure out what the needs are in their communities and go out and make that happen. So they're typically nonprofits. There is money available from the state for these organizations to do this work. So I'm going to use an example in Baltimore City. Southeast CDC is a community development organization who happens to own some property to help with revitalization in the Southeast Baltimore area. They manage the Main Street, so they've hired they hire and oversee the Main Street manager and the work of the Main Street along the business area. They have acquired property along the Main Street in order to facilitate redevelopment, and they've also been able to not always buy property, but be able to facilitate development into the area. So it's really about community revitalization, is what it is. Okay, so it can be done at the commercial level or the housing level. This particular group also is able to create a revolving loan fund. So that landlords could help to revitalize their properties, because there's an issue there with some landlords. But they also have revolving loan funds for businesses in the area as well. So the main issue is capacity. It's making sure there's money there, but also the right people to be able to be flexible with the work. So there's another organization, St. Ambrose Housing Aid Center, that doesn't do anything with commercial, but it's all residential work, and they do the housing counseling and also the community revitalization, but they also have a massive multifamily portfolio. There's a community development organization in Cambridge called Cambridge Main Street, and also they work with the Delmarva Community Services. And Delmarva is doing senior housing, but they've also worked with the Main Street to be able to revitalize the Main Street. The Main Street can use, I know your Main Street is also using a lot of state money, the Neighborhood Business Works program. And that program is really successful and can be a way that a community development organization can attract that money from the state to be able to make sure that the small businesses have that money. So it's really flexible based on what the community needs are. And based on what the needs are, you make sure that there's money available and have the right people in the room to be able to do it. Dundalk, also very successful community development organization, manage the Main Street, but also do a lot of work around revitalization of the Main Street and the neighborhood area. So they put on events, they also have a home ownership component where they're able to get grant money to help people, with closing costs and that kind of thing. They are working with that Main Street to help. They've acquired some property along there. I don't know if you've ever been to Dundalk Main Street, but it's super cute. And acquired, property as well, and revitalized. Hagerstown also has a Main Street, but also works with a community development organization there. So I'm just throwing out some of these examples. I'm sorry I don't have a nice shiny PowerPoint. I'm in Annapolis all the time these days. So I guess, we might be able to have a little dialogue about what some of the needs are that you're seeing and see how a community development organization might fit and how we could do it. I understand that the state is very committed to Ellicott City, so I would imagine that a lot of the state resources could be helpful to help start up the work. The key is this, and some of you who've been in nonprofits for a while would know this, and some of you who haven't been, I think it makes sense. The state has a good amount of capital money, which is brick and mortar dollars, community legacy, strategic demolition, those kinds of funding sources that you have to use for brick and mortar projects, okay? Community development organizations hire people, right? So you need to have money to hire people and keep the lights on. And that is a challenging set of money, okay? And I don't know what your philanthropy looks like in this county, but statewide, we don't have a very robust philanthropic community. Let's just say that. I mean, there's pretty robust in Baltimore City, but it's not as much as in the rest of the state, which I think is unfortunate. And so, although Howard County, I would imagine, has the Community Foundation and a few others. So the nonprofits have to be super creative about how to be able to make sure that there's additional money to pay the people and keep the lights on. So that's foundation money, that's developer fees, if you're working in tandem with a private entity to help with development. We've got legislation in the General Assembly to try to we've created this community development fund, and now we're trying to get it funded for operating dollars as well. So we're trying. So that's one thing to be mindful of, is making, I will say that there are several counties that do support their own community development organizations. Montgomery County puts a lot of money into theirs. Garrett County puts a lot of money into theirs. So if there's money from the county, and that's more than just CDBG. CDBG is the Community Development Block Grant Program. It's a federal program that is administered, every county administers their own program. And there's a planning process every year of how it's going to be used. But a lot of community development organizations utilize that money because it is flexible operating dollars, but it is reimbursable. You have to spend the money and then get reimbursed, which could, cause a cash flow problem if you don't have the right money on hand. But it is flexible dollars. So I'm sure that Howard County has a robust CDBG. So that's another funding source for that kind of situation. So the great thing about community development organizations is that there's a board of directors that can be from the community, but also business leaders, people who are able to fundraise, but also groups that know, board members who know what the needs are in the community. Some community development organizations have advisory groups. A lot of them really work really hard to be out in the community to really understand what the needs are. So I think a good startup model, if you're thinking about it, is 1 or 2 staff to do the organizing, but also to start thinking about what it is the community development organization going to acquire some of the properties on the main street to help revitalize them. And bring in state money to help with that. Is the organization just simply trying to organize the business area and work with the main street? So there's, it just kind of depends on what the needs are as to how to form the organization. But there's several opportunities. I mean, I'm sure if you've got the time and want to go visit the Dundalk Renaissance, I think that's probably a really good model. For what you might be looking for in Southeast and others as well. But the key is the money piece, because it's not going to be successful unless there's money. And that is a challenge. So that's just kind of a general overview. I'm happy to take some questions.
Would you mind commenting on just organizational structure? You mentioned the board of directors, but obviously there needs to be hands and minds on the street. How typical, how are they structured in terms of staffing?
Sure. Well, typically there's an executive director and a program manager or organizer. Sometimes that can be one and the same. It also depends on how much you end up growing. I mean, it's really good to have expertise either on the board or on the staff in, in making these real estate deals work. Knowledge of the state dollars, knowledge of, some capital dollars that might be able to come in terms of financing, knowledge of how to make those deals work. There's plenty of people in the state that know how to do that. And definitely people who understand, the community, who can be organizers in the community. It also depends on if you're just thinking about the main street or doing some work in the residents around the street, which I think probably would be the best interest actually, to be able to organize all around the area. So an organizer, someone with that business and deals expertise, the executive director should know how to do the fundraising. Some organizations hire a development person to be able to fundraise, but I think that's kind of level 2 stuff. To start out, you really need someone who's going to be savvy enough to get all that together and then hire a development person. Yeah. Talking about Renaissance, they have 4 people.
Does the state have guidelines more about how the board of directors is assembled, like 1/3 residents, 1/3 business owners, 1/3 extended community, or does the state not follow that general federal?
Right, no, not for a regular nonprofit community development organization. So HUD has some rules if you're going to be what's called a community housing development, CHODO is the short. And it says that 1/3 has to be from community. You don't have to do that in these kinds of organizations. It is good to have community members on the board, but there's not a formula. I mean, you basically want to use a similar model that Maryland Nonprofits puts out for its board of directors. So, you want to have someone with some financial fundraising expertise, you want to have some public relations expertise, you want to have folks who know how to fundraise, and then some expertise in the field. That's your aim.
So again, what is that organization that has that structure, the board?
Oh, the Maryland Nonprofits is a really great resource. Yeah, they call themselves Maryland Nonprofits now. Yeah, it was Mano. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they have great resources, great trainings for their board members. They're based out of Baltimore, but they have trainings all over the state. They really can help with that initial startup in terms of how the board composition, how to make sure you've got a diverse board, because that's super important, and that kind of thing. So, and then they also have lists of consultants to help as well, but we can help you with that as well. If you're thinking about doing this and want to have a consultant help move that forward, we can either do that or help find somebody to do that.
So I'm from the Ellicott City Partnership, which is the Main Street Maryland organization, and we're, all the things you're talking about. We don't manage property, but we do, all the other things, as any typical Main Street organization does, right?
Right.
And so one of the things that I'm really interested in is hearing your experience with, there are certainly the CDC or CEOs, I suppose, who are more focused on owning and managing property. Have you seen environments in which you have sort of a multiple nonprofit scene, right, where we all have our sort of distinct missions and we're trying to, work together to, for the good of the community? Because we do basically everything else, but we don't manage property.
Oh yeah, I mean that's certainly possible. Where the Main Street does its normal stuff, which is working with the business community, putting on events to promote the area. And there's a third prong to that structure.
Matt, do you guys have any revolving loan funds or anything like that?
No, we don't. So that's right, absolutely. That's the piece
so
that, how do we work with that? That's great,
Right. So you could have the Main Street, but you could also have this community development entity that's working on the property revolving loan, getting capital from various places, and working with the residents as well in terms of organizing. So you could have that structure. You could have the community development organization with the Main Street as part of it. There's definitely those kinds of models for sure.
Are there any, like Doug mentioned, Doug Walk, are there any examples you think of that have this sort of cool multi-organization setup that's
Yeah, Salisbury,
Okay,
right?
cool.
Salisbury has the neighborhood housing services, and then also has a Main Street. But they work together, but they're not like the NHS does some commercial stuff with them, but not a lot. All of Baltimore is that way, except for Southeast CDC is where they're, and Dundalk is where they're, Dundalk's Baltimore County. Southeast CDC is where they are combined. In
Right.
other parts of the city, they have the various main streets, and then with the community development organization working with that. So Bella Edison has it combined. They didn't always, they combined them. Let's see, Pennsylvania Avenue is getting its own main street, and then there's the Habitat nearby. Just thinking along the map here. Downtown has dental partnership. So there, yeah, I can point to a couple of others as well. So there's the Cambridge Main Street, along with the Delmarva Community Services. Cambridge Main Street is really, it's really amazing. Cambridge is kind of like the Baltimore Eastern Shore. It has similar segregated city. It's got poverty at the Eastern Shore. It's got lots of things. And so they have revitalized that whole Main Street, Race Street, using state's neighborhood business works money. I mean, those businesses get those loans. They're super flexible if you need some help with refinancing or whatever. And I know that the state has money specifically for Ellicott City through that program.
So you talked about the state funds that are available. Those are the discretionary funds you said?
They're you have to apply for them.
You apply for them, they're discretionary, they're not targeted for any specific.
That is correct,
Competitive?
right.
They're
So they're competitive. So
Okay.
community legacy is statewide, strategic demolition is statewide.
But those are both capital.
Those are all capital.
Yeah.
Right, those are all capital, right. If we get the community development fund funded, it will be statewide. The CDBG money, every county gets its allocation of CDBG money. So Howard has some allocation of it.
What about Bernie? Where is Bernie?
So Bernie doesn't include Howard, but
But it includes Anne Arundel?
yeah. So Bernie, the Baltimore Regional Neighborhood Initiative, is inside the Baltimore Beltway, and they just created one for the National Capital area inside the Beltway, and so that they have designated capital dollars, $4 million for the National Capital area. They call NED, and Bernie has $12 million. So what happens is, because those two areas have designated money, the community legacy money and strategic demolition money are going elsewhere across the state. So that's a good thing. So you cut out some of that competition in that way. So there's some other housing funds, and yeah, the operating dollars is really
Is the operating for Baltimore City, that comes out of DEC though? They fund the Main Street positions?
I think so.
Yeah, so that's a difference than.
It's a different model. The Baltimore Main
Math,
Streets are done in a
than-
different way.
I don't know if you know that the DEC funds those positions.
And the
It'd
other-
be like having EDAs fund people.
Right.
And the other piece of that is, yeah, the Maryland
They can do
Main
that.
Streets, you don't get any
Good.
money from the state.
Should.
Although you're getting more, the Maryland Main Streets are getting more operating funding this year. They got 400,000.
But that's.
Considering how many Main Streets there are.
Right.
That
So,
doesn't go to
Divide by
the.
26.
I know. The
You're
the
low.
1.5 didn't quite get there, but maybe one day. So, yes, there's been an effort to try to get more money for the Maryland Main Streets. I mean, 1.5 million isn't even going to get you what you
Right.
need, given how many Main Streets there are. But I think that's a flaw in the model, frankly, of the Main Streets. You know, you're not getting any federal money, you're not getting any state. It's like, so what are you there for? You know, it's a tough model. But that's partially why there has been some of this mergering of the Main Streets with a community development organization, because there is that structure that can bring in additional dollars. And it happens in some cases.
Who is the organizational unity is the biggest in Maryland?
The biggest community development organization and one of the best ones, Garrett County Community Action.
For Cumberland? Is that Cumberland?
It's in, no,
Okay.
keep going.
Oakland.
It's in Oakland.
Oakland.
Yeah, Oakland.
So Oakland,
Yeah.
what is the name of it?
It's called Garrett County Community Action, and they're big and bold and all of that because they're the only game in town. So they're a community action agency. Howard County has a community action agency as well, but they have become the community development organization in the area. They're doing housing, they're doing business development, they're doing job training, they're doing housing counseling, they're doing Head Start, they're the only game in town. That's why all the money goes to them, because it's rural county and that's it.
They get a lot of support from the state too, they always have for different things.
Yeah, well, especially now under this governor, but yeah. So I think they're a good, it's just, Garrett County's a whole different ballgame, so it's just different. But they have a really good partnership with the local community college to do some of the job training, and the issue up in Garrett is they're losing people. People are going away. Kids are not staying with their families. There's no jobs up there, so they're trying to retain jobs. They're also trying to retain. So anyway, they're trying to tackle all of this. And they do have, I'm not sure they have a designated Maryland Main Street, but they do have a drag that has all the cool businesses on it that we work with.
What about other states? So I did work up in New York, and there's lots of community developed corporations.
Yeah, I don't know specifics up there, but there's organizations like mine in every state.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Are there models outside of Maryland that you look at and think, wow, wish we did that? Or
yeah, I mean,
others that we should-
Massachusetts is really amazing. But they're so well financed. I mean,
because of the
Well,
state?
The
Why?
community, is it the community, it's the act called?
yeah, they have tax credits bigger and better than ours. Okay, so there is another state program called the Community Investment Tax Credit Program. It's $1.75 million in tax credits, but basically nonprofits apply for the credits, and then let's say you get $30,000 in credits, you can give the credits to a donor who donates $500 or more, and that donor gets half of their donation back in a tax credit. Okay, so $30,000 could raise $60,000. I mean, that's actually an advantage that you have here in Howard. I think that there will be tons of people that would take advantage of those credits to be able to. Now, the challenge is you've got to market the credits. It's a whole individual donor campaign, and we've tried to raise the amount for years and just took off this year. But Massachusetts has a really different model, and the reason they have a different model is because corporations that do business in Massachusetts actually have to pay income taxes in Massachusetts. That's not the case in Maryland. Walmart, Verizon, those guys, they don't pay income tax here in Maryland. They do business here, but they don't pay income tax here. So that's another issue for another day. But because of that, they certify their community, this is in Massachusetts, they certify their community development organizations. They go through a lot of technical assistance and training. And only those that are certified take advantage of these credits. These are 100% credits. Okay? So so a corporation can put in a bunch of money in the nonprofit and get 100% of the credit back. I mean, but that's because they have a state liability. That's why, So there's some. This keeps coming up more and more in the context of a lot of different things. So I might take this issue on at some point. But that's one of so their tax credit program helps that community development groups thrive up there and all over Massachusetts, not just in Boston, but in the various rural areas as well. Yeah. So I think so Delaware's are just starting. Delaware just started 2 community development organizations because they passed personnel, and they're literally just getting started because they have, especially with like all the growth happening in Lewis and some of the other places, they just need someone who's paying attention to it other than just the state government. So, I mean, that's the other advantage to local community development organization, actually somebody paying attention to what's happening other than just state government, to be able to facilitate the work that needs to be done, bring in the right developers or people who can help revitalize the area. But it definitely is commercial and residential. I don't think I've ever seen a community development organization that just does commercial. It definitely is a mix.
And we have that here. A lot of residents down on Main Street as well as businesses.
Oh yeah, I would
You know,
imagine.
A lot of businesses in the same buildings. So.
Right, there's that piece, and then there's also, I think, probably just the surrounding interests in, right around Ellicott City as well. That would be good. But the tax credit program is something that's a really good resource, and
What's it going to increase to?
we have been trying to get it increased to 3.5 million for years. And we need to prioritize the development fund this year and then go back and try the tax credits. The tax credits are tough because, because of the state tax liability issue, but also there's only a little bit of wiggle room in the budget every year, and so they only let a few tax credit bills go. Like this year, they're just letting the opportunity zone tax credit go through.
Do you know anything about the way Southeast administers their loan funds? Is it Southeast that has?
Yeah, Southeast CDC has a revolving loan fund that they got through the Bernie program. I don't know the specifics of how it works, but I do know that they work with a business or a landlord to qualify them. It is a matching grant as well, so there has to be some other investment by that particular person. And then that they can revitalize their building and then get paid back. So it is revolving.
Well, that's a grant, you said? That's a matching?
Well, no, the business has to put up a matching.
Right, the matching amount that they're borrowing from.
Right, exactly. I don't think it's 100%, I think it's a 50% match. So, that's good. That's actually a good deal. Yeah. And the interest rate is fairly low as well. So, yeah. But they had to, it's a revolving fund because they knew they were going to get one set of cash to be able to make it work. So they have to bring that money back in. So that they have to qualify for those and all that. It's been pretty successful as I understand it. So they would be a good, they're going through a leadership transition right now, but there's still some good stuff there that could talk about what they're doing.
So historic preservation. We have a unique set of assets in our community.
Yeah.
And they've received a lot of publicity. And I'm wondering if there are examples out there you can think of where an organization was tasked, at least in part, to preserve buildings that would otherwise be at risk of demolition, removal, revitalization, perhaps in a different direction. But is there any history out there of groups addressing those specific kinds of challenges?
So I think it kind of, yes, there are definitely groups that work on that, especially if there are buildings in a historic area where you can't actually demolish them, right? And there's a particular challenge, I think you talked about this, up in Cumberland, because they're pretty much the whole town is a preservation area. But that preservation is great. It does set up its own challenges because sometimes it is more expensive to revitalize a building, with historic as a historic piece. But there's historic tax credits. There's lots of ways to make it work. But I think Southeast CDC had to deal with that in one of their buildings. I'm not sure if Dundalk had to. I don't know about that. I think you would probably know better than I do where some of these other areas are. But
Pretty much almost all the main streets are at least dealing.
Yeah.
They may not be a locally designated historic district. They may just be on the National Register. I think in most cases, the local CDC, if it's a main street, if they're not doing it out of requirement, they're doing it because the community members that make it up don't want to see them investing in demoing parts of their downtown.
Sure, for sure. I mean, that I think is happening in Cambridge. There's actually one building that still, I don't know if you know about this, but there's this building.
The Hearn building?
Yes.
Yeah, we paid for its emergency stabilization.
Yeah, because the thing was going to fall down, but
Yeah.
nobody wanted to see it fall down.
Right.
And so the Main Street really helped to identify it. There was obviously Preservation Maryland had funding, but they've also identified some other donors. The state got involved, so they're really trying to get that building, so It's about that facilitation process. They don't own the building, but they facilitate the money needed and the development needed. So I think most community development organizations do a lot of that kind of partnership development, facilitating.
Can we go back to the
Sure.
revolving loan?
Yeah.
I put up the money, I get my loan, I flood. So what kind of liability do I have to pay the money back? Like what types of CDOs, CDCs are faced with catastrophic events where you're putting up an investment and then 2 years later you're putting up the same investment, you still have to follow the same rules and you still have to pay back the loan from the previous catastrophe. Like, we're on the struggle bus here.
Yeah.
Big time.
I understand. No, I totally understand, and I think to the state's credit, I mean, they have the Neighborhood Business Works program. I think some of that they're giving as a grant for some of the, or they did it at the time. But yeah, no, that's a really good question. I know that Towson CDC hasn't dealt with that question because there hasn't been that issue. So, but I think the state has some guidelines about that.
So to your question, who holds the paper? Is the paper held by the CDC, the obligation, or is it held by a bank, a traditional lending
Well,
institution?
that's what I'm trying to understand, because can the CDC just say like, okay, will you just forgive the loan? Whereas right now, the loan is held by, well, through that program that you just named, is through the Department of Housing and Community Development.
Mm-hmm.
Now they've postponed all of our payments,
Right.
but that's it.
The note is generally held by, I've had a revolving fund before. The note's generally held by the nonprofit.
Yeah.
And so they have their own underwriting. Generally the nonprofit, and one of the challenges with it is the nonprofit has to develop their own underwriting practice.
Right.
For how they're going to make decisions on who gets the loan and who doesn't. And then it depends on what position you're in on the loan in terms of if you're in a position as the nonprofit, normally the challenge, of course, is the CDO isn't going to foreclose on you to call the loan.
Yeah.
Right, but so it depends on what position they're in. They're normally never in first position, so they're not going to even be in a position to do that. And yeah, I mean, they would be the ones left holding the paper and potentially absolving you of it or pushing it out or all those sorts of things. And really, it just hits their revolving fund ability if that loan is always out there. I mean, unless I'm mistaken, that's been our
I think
experience.
that's right, and I think there's actually an advantage to a nonprofit having it rather than the department or a bank. You know, there are some revolving loans where they partner, like there's a thing called Healthy Neighborhoods in Baltimore City, and that is held by a bank. So there is that kind of disadvantage. But a nonprofit doing the revolving loan, there's at least going to be a little bit more wiggle room there. So, but we can learn more through Southeast CDC how they do theirs.
So they're all secure loans, it sounds like.
Yeah.
There would be more than one loan, so and you
Right.
represent one business, other businesses or homeowners could take advantage of the same loan pool. And if there's some history of repayment, replenishment, loans can be, extended to other parties as well. And I think a safe haven, which is kind of what I'm thinking this should be, terrific if there was an organization out there that could take the risk that a bank is typically unwilling to take, and hold paper. Whether they can collateralize that with another institution, let them hold part of the paper or not, but it wouldn't be a bang on the door saying, time's up, you owe us X dollars.
I'm not trying to imply that. I'm just trying to understand, like, all of these, we got here because of a catastrophic event. None of the towns that you've named got where they are because, like,
That's right.
They got there maybe because of, instability in the economy or, a historic building that's valuable to the town or things like that. Like, what we're working up against is not something, like, nobody's gonna come into a book and be like, this is how we did it. We're literally making up the rules as we go along.
I hear you, yeah.
So,
yeah.
I'm not so worried about, like, the CDO being like, okay, well, we're gonna take your building, which at that point I might be like, fine. Okay.
There are the keys.
I'm not getting it out, so good luck. But what happens also, like, and this is going back a little bit further in the conversation, like, we have a huge problem in this county with philanthropy. So if your bottom line is always showing, like, we have to give forgive X loan, like, at what point does the well dry up? Like, that's my concern, is like, what kind of corner are we backing ourselves into where we're not attracted to give money? Whereas we need to make ourselves as attractive as possible to get the most amount of money.
Mhm.
I would hope that would be that we have a solution to the challenge that creates the problem. You know,
Right.
parallel path to what
Ultimately.
we're talking about, but that there would be some safety and comfort knowing we've come up with a solution to the challenge of water in downtown Ellicott City, which removes a great deal of the risk. So you're more likely to repay because you don't have those capital events happening again and again and again. So you build up some comfort, you know, I think in time. But the safety to me is that the entity that's lending money isn't one that has the traditional underwriting standards of a normal lending institution. These are underwriting standards that are more complex but comfortable to people that are trying to run businesses in environments where these challenges happen. And I'm hopeful that we have a solution that, you know, can be announced at some point that addresses that problem, and that you feel more comfortable to take that loan out through this organization, even for a traditional bank.
I mean, I think
There's also CDFIs, Community
Right.
Development Finance Institutions. They are, some are for-profit, some are nonprofit. They're not a traditional bank. They like to take more risk. They will take more risk. That's what they're designed to do. They are, they're basically investment funds. So they'll look for investors who are willing to take risk. They are underwriting these loans. They really want to go in. They are mission driven. They want to go in, revitalize, have a lot of them use like new market tax credits and other types of tax credits to make projects put together. A really good one in Baltimore is TRF, although they're doing stuff statewide. They just did Canal Place up in Cumberland.
What is Canal Place?
Canal Place is,
Canal Place.
yeah, it's a whole, it's up in just outside of Cumberland,
It's in
right?
Cumberland.
Yeah,
Oh.
it's in Cumberland.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, and it's a totally revitalized
train
area
station?
by the train station.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
It's
it's
really cool.
great.
Yeah, it's cool.
We go there every day.
But they are financing, and if CDFI puts money in, you're going to be able to get some other money. So that I think it's probably worth attracting a CDFI into the Ellicott City revitalization, because they're willing to take risk, much bigger than a traditional bank, much better than the state. They know how to utilize state money for helping all of these things, and they have their own. We've got several. We've got a few, I should say. TRF is one of them. They're not TRF anymore. Reinvestment Fund. The Reinvestment Fund is one of them. MECU has one, actually, Maryland Employees Credit Union. There is Enterprise has one. There's I can think of it. And then there are some from other parts of the U.S. that are interested in investing in Maryland. There's a group called SINAIR, which I'm on the advisory board of, that wants to do some investment in Maryland.
One in Western PA that does stuff in like Garrett and Allegheny.
Right, because Garrett and Allegheny
Don't
can't
have
seem
they
to
can't
get
track
one.
their own.
Yeah.
You can become a certified CDFI, but you have to go. There's a thorough process.
Well,
to becoming one.
and there's federal money for CDFIs to
Through
utilize
Treasury.
out of Treasury, but you have to apply for them, and it's so going. I think one thing that we might want to think about is attracting Freed Investment Fund, SINAIR, or some of the others into the area to see if because they're very patient capital. They're willing to keep their money in a project for a while. They take loans. Yeah, they're willing to take risk, and they're mission driven. This kind of stuff excites, with work around Ellicott City, I think would be exciting to some CDFIs. Yeah. But again, a community development organization can help attract them, but certainly, any of us can call them up and say, hey, we got a project for you, and they'll come in. So,
I have a question for you.
yeah.
Basically, Annapolis is getting a lot of title searches constantly. So a lot of those businesses that are located down around the lower area of Main Street there are getting the same problem that Angie's and many other people here are facing. How do they cope with that? Is a CDC or a CDO helping with that at all?
Helping to
Basically helping them recover after every new flood event.
yeah, well, there we have another one. God forbid.
There's storm surges too. I mean, it's
Yeah,
water comes up.
so what happened, there was one, there's a town in Prince George's County called Edmondson, okay? And they had a terrible flood. This is 10 years ago, something like that. And flooded the basements, flooding the buildings, it was terrible. So their mayor, who now works for county, they got this really innovative, it looks like a giant screw is what it looks like, and it really just turns the water out once the storm surge comes in and puts it somewhere else. So he was just innovative and said, we're going to do something different and we're going to make this happen. So they have problems. So a lot of it is stormwater management that has to be done. In Baltimore, Baltimore is an old city, so there are flooded basements all the time, right? I mean, it just happens. So I know that the city has some money to help businesses and help residents, with their basements. It's a process that I'd like to improve, but it's there. So you're exactly right that there hasn't been any community development organization or community that's had to recover from something like this. So you're exactly right. So you're starting from scratch in a lot of ways, but there are some innovative models out there. I mean, Garrett County is also, they've done a lot with innovation in housing. There were at one point a lot of vacant properties in Garrett County, and they revitalized them or took them down. So, really trying to boost up the economy. I don't know if I answered your question, but
You fix the problem causing the problem first, and then you're more attracted to that redevelopment money and finance.
Well, I think you have to do both and, right? Because you have to still, help with people's livelihoods and get in, revitalize the area, but hopefully the other root cause will.
If the CDC were formed and a group of assets were contributed by the county to the CDC, and if the CDC was able to find a way to ground lease those assets, to create cash flow, to offset the burden of the staffing, to create a loan program, and use the proceeds of the monetization of the redevelopment or development of those assets, and a long-term ground lease structure, 55 years, 95 years, 99 years, tantamount to ownership almost, so it's highly financeable. Are there any models out there where a community development corporation or a community development organization or the other entity that you just gave us the acronym of with 4 letters that I can't remember,
CDFI,
has used a structure like that where they have contributed assets they're able to monetize and then use the benefits of the monetization of those assets to offset the economic challenges of running an organization like this. As thinly staffed as we could possibly make it, but with highly capable staff that really engages at all levels of asset management, development management, community revitalization, on the housing side and or commercial side.
I haven't heard of that happening in Maryland, but it's not out of the question. I think groups are really looking to be as creative as possible these days to try to bring in revenue. So if the county's willing to do that with a bunch of properties and make that happen, and I mean the other model that does happen, which is close to what I think you're talking about, is a TIF structure, which is tax increment financing. So basically, taking the future proceeds of a development and utilizing that in the currently, so that the property isn't really paying property taxes, but you use the property taxes that it might be gaining to already put this development in place. So you're kind of borrowing off the future proceeds of the taxes that'll come out of this development. So that is also a model for how to, but it's so for instance, Baltimore just did a humongous one for Covington. There's some other TIF areas as well. So, I mean, the risk is that it's possibly well, it might not work, and you've just lost a bunch of money. That is the risk, but it could work very well I think, in Ellicott City, because you know that there's going to be some activity, and you're going to be able to get some of that. There will be property taxes eventually on this.
Mike, I just wanted to jump into your question. I mean, you're basically exactly providing the definition for what dozens of preservation groups around the country do. So there's so many of them now that there's a network of preservation groups that meet on a biannual basis for convenings of revolving fund property owning preservation groups. So that has been the historic preservation community has been at that. Somebody would argue they were one of the first community development organizations.
Right.
But they've been at that, and so we divested ourselves of a lot of our properties for various different reasons. But there are organizations out there that we could point to that the entirety of their finance is based on property. Historic Boston bought property in really rough neighborhoods in the 70s, and those are now extremely nice neighborhoods.
Right.
They've held on to property because
Right.
they took that long vision. There are groups, Historic Seattle is another one, that is now kind of pushing out into areas of Seattle that they're sort of pushing back against gentrification as an organization, because they were able to buy in areas that nobody wanted to be in Seattle 20, 30 years ago. Now those rents are paying for the organization's less profitable work in other parts. So, I mean, I could come up with a list of 15 or 20 groups around the nation that's all that they do. So there's certainly a model out there for that. Probably one of the most successful is Pittsburgh. They actually have their own CDFI, Pittsburgh Landmark and Capital. And so that's all that they do, and they've sort of made a name for themselves, sort of being involved in the real estate world. So it's certainly an option, and particularly if there's a large asset base.
And on the TIF front, I understand a couple years ago, the prior administration here in Howard County put enabling legislation through to create the first TIF in Howard County's history, I believe in Columbia, to support the Howard Hughes Corporation's efforts to revitalize areas around Meriwether and some of the other improvements there. And it's a long proven, although it has to be statutorily based, mechanism for taking dollars through the taxes, real estate taxes, that would otherwise be charged in a defined area. We've got to go back to defining the area again. Unfortunately, you've got to define the catchment area. At some point, those tax revenues are set aside for infrastructure investment largely. So a lot of the challenge that we face, not only in creating a CDC, is also being faced, how do we fund that thing that's going to create the solution to the water problem? So there may be, I'm not saying downtown Ellicott City can support the tremendous cost involved in doing that by itself, but it may assist in that effort and help offset some of that burden from a tax standpoint. So the TIF is a great vehicle that provides a lot of flexibility in addition to what you were just describing in historic Boston and other places around the country. I'm a native Bostonian. I know a lot about what's happened up there, and it's a great petri dish, I think, to pull some ideas from. Matt, I didn't interrupt.
Yeah, no. I interrupted you, I think. So one of the things that I think it sort of pulls a little bit of the thread that maybe Angie suggested earlier. So clearly we're in a different world now. But after the 16 flood, we didn't lack financing, I don't think, as much, right? So our issue wasn't who's going to revive. It's, in fact, we turned the town around in whatever, this unbelievably short span of time. Without that, so I don't want to suggest that we're not in a completely different world right now, but I'm interested in.
We do have something that we don't have now.
What's
We
that?
have certainty because we didn't think this was going to happen.
Well, right. So that's what I wanted to. That's what I wanted to ask about. So, if our issue is not necessarily related to financing, let's say the capital's out there, people actually want to own properties and redevelop and whatever, it seems to be the certainty thing. So if we get that piece in place, which clearly at some point, whether it's done via government, whether it's done, as Mike was suggesting, maybe there's some role for public-private partnership or some whatever, that seems to be, as far as the read that we get in the street, that's this certainty that's lacking, but not necessarily the financing. How does that play out in other scenarios that you've seen? Or are we in kind of uncharted territory, right? Because it's we're not just afraid of typical overbank riverine flooding and stuff gets wet, it's a wet bank. No, it's if we can avoid the catastrophic, and I'm not sure how many other locales are kind of dealing with.
Yeah, you know, I think that kind of thing is going to start to happen on the Eastern Shore as sea level rise happens, like in Prince Frederick right now, and on Gibson Island and on Smith Island. Smith Island is sinking. Okay, there's like only 40 families left on there, and they have to take a ferry to school in the morning, and the ferry comes back. So that's got its own set of challenges.
But you wouldn't want to refinance that, because in the sense that, like, if it's truly unrecoverable, I mean, this is not about, Venice and like where we're going to put literally $1 trillion H&H stuff, but they're not coming back. So there's no like, well, how do we finance redevelopment? Because there is no redevelopment.
But Prince Frederick they were very much affected in Sandy, right? And their sea level is still rising, but again, just don't know whether another Sandy is going to be coming, but they have been able to get some redevelopment and reinvestment in Prince Frederick. And I don't know what that formula was as to why are we investing now and all of that. So I hear you, the certainty is a really big issue. Hopefully the county will move quicker on a solution to this issue, which probably could have been avoided with that, but that because the certainty is going to be a big issue. But hopefully, the other thing is, if there are, it sounds like the community is very interested in the revitalization of Main Street too. So there's got to be a way to continue to attract, people from all over to be a part of the Main Street revitalization. Whether it's just being there and eating at the restaurants, or so there could be a strategy where the county and community development organization and Main Street really look to Baltimore and other places and say, hey, come on in. We've got these great places. We've got
Amen to that.
So now I'm all interested. I need to come down and do more shopping. Be an example when you're over. But I also think maybe even talking with the redevelopment fund or SENER or some of those CDFIs who are good at taking risk and how they're what that tipping point might be for them.
Right.
Frankly.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that would be helpful as well.
So I was just saying, one of the things that an example would be like New Orleans. It's not.
New Orleans is a great example.
It's not if it's going to flood again.
It will.
We know it is. It's when, and they go through this on a revolt. It's like a revolving door, and it could be twice in a year. It could be once. It could be a 20-year time span, but you know it's going to happen again. And that doesn't help our local businesses, looking at their business, or our residents. And so I'm curious about, I guess they do levies and everything else they can to do to try and prevent that catastrophe, but you know it's still coming.
See the region New York, right?
Stop.
Yeah, sorry.
I think that's one of the things that's been so difficult about this, right? Like, there might be a title surge in Annapolis, and there's lots of accommodations in the buildings, like how high is a window pane, like what is the bottom 3 feet of your walls wrapped with, and like, yes, maybe you have a day or two of cleaning up, and that in itself is a hardship. We're missing entire chunks of the road.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have sidewalks, we didn't have gas, we didn't have water. So it's like the level of destruction is so extreme too, right? It's not like Agnes comes up, gets stuck, water rises at a rate that there's enough time to get out of the way, and then as the water recedes, doesn't take away an entire road or all of its infrastructure. So it is like, it's just hard to wrap your brain around it. Like, I mean,
fear I have is, despite everyone's best intention to come up with that solution, the magic bullet, that isn't quite magic enough, that there still is risk. I mean, things
I
can
think
happen.
I think that's part of doing business in this community. I mean, that's part of doing business, period. There's always an element of risk, right? But we're doing business in a community that has a history of flooding. That's not a secret. It's just the way that it's happening now has changed so significantly, and the impact is becoming greater than just these 1,000 people that are going to lose their jobs or lose their homes. Now we're talking about a major thoroughfare between these two counties being closed for months on end.
Right.
Things like that, like how our resources are spent or geared, or so it's just, I don't think that the magic bullet exists, I guess is what I'm getting at, but I do think that there's also a level of acceptance. 2 feet of water moving down Main Street is a heck of a lot less than 18 feet. So you just, you have to just change your perspective. So.
I want to sort of throw a question out in terms of, when you were saying after the 16 flood, we got back to normal really quick.
Oh, not normal. There's no normal.
No, there's no normal, but basically we filled storefronts, right? And so what I'm asking is filling storefronts the only measure of success?
Absolutely not.
But that's, so I mean, it's not dealing, we've heard about consolidation of ownership and what that can do to rents. We've heard about, from the Main Street residents, about gentrification and affordability, about the makeup of business, because the makeup is important. If it's all antique shops or if it's all one thing, that's not gonna, so, but there, and I'm not trying to say that the recovery out, I mean, what was done was Herculean, and is impressive, but it's like long term, even if we are able to stop flooding completely, I feel like that piece is missing, and whether that's with Main Street or with somebody else, but the ability to resolve and address those challenges is, I think
those
important.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I totally agree.
Okay.
And so, but I think those are challenges no matter
Right,
what.
right. Yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah.
certainly there are certain avenues that we can choose to finance in certain ways that are more favorable to maintain. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone would maintain that the response to the 16 was like magical nirvana. We still, people have still not recovered from that event, let alone round 2.
But when you're saying financing wasn't an issue, so why are we trying to create this? It's still, I think there are financing issues at play. They just may not be as apparent as.
I agree. Totally agree. And that's right. No, and I don't. Well, it's more, and it's way more than just storefronts. It's residents, it's services, it's this is a community that comprises all sorts of disparate elements.
Yeah, I think we agree.
Right.
I do agree on this. I just wanted to kind of
right. And my question is simply, let's make sure that solutions proposed, and I'm not opposed to anything, but let's make sure that solutions proposed solve the problems that we want to solve.
Yeah, and it still comes back to that same question of what exactly are the problems we want to solve.
Right.
Well, and I think that it was interesting you remarked about 2 things, need and money, right? And I would say we all have a goal. We want the town to thrive. We want it to return to whatever it may be. I really want to go back to 2007 before the economy tanked out.
Right.
Let's be honest. We're going to set our goals high. I'm going after the golden carrot. But I think part of the problem is we are incredibly divided in this community at this moment in time of how that goal will be achieved. And there is a definitive us versus them mentality. And until we can all flip the coin, I don't know if that goal can be achieved. I just don't. I don't. You could bring all the money in the world in here, and I'm not sure that we could achieve this goal.
Going back to what you brought to when you first came in and you made the distinction between a CDO versus a CDC, and of course this exploratory committee has been tasked with the charge of determining whether or not we need a CDC. Do we need to shift our thinking into the possibility of something that does not necessarily meet the HUD definition of a CDC?
I think so, because I think you're you're asking this organization or entity to do much more than that. So, yeah, that's why we don't talk about CDCs. We talk about them as community development organizations.
And my next question kind of goes to what I was trying to grasp that Nick was talking about with regard to the CDC that went into neighborhoods and then at some point in time divested. Are we looking for, and I don't know if this is you or all of us thinking, are we looking for an organization to come in and take on a project that is Ellicott City, and then when the project is completed, they divest and they're out? Or are we looking for something that's permanent and ongoing and is going to sustain the economy over and all of those communal elements that we tasked them with the mission to accomplish and maintain that over the long term? What are we looking at?
Yeah, well, change doesn't happen in a day.
Yeah, true.
I think one of the things that Mike said really early on was that we're making this up as we go, but a lot of that to point at that and ECP is already being done. So having a CDO come in and kind of oversee the big lift, as per se, to get us back on track, and then fade away as we emerge from that, that's when I can see something like ECP, which has been there all along, continues to go on and carry that mantle.
But and I also want to address sort of Angie's piece with regard to the division within the community and everybody being able to come together. Is the CDC possible, or CDO possibly an instrument that can help facilitate that?
I think it is as well, and I'm hopeful, optimistic, perhaps too much so that this, Beth, I think, addressed that last week pretty eloquently for all of us to hear. The trust factor has to be there. This has to be a group of us. It can't be just some people from away who come in and say, here's how it works. But it's something that's organic that really comes from the people who are here. It might help bridge the divides that are so obvious to all of us. They need to be healed. I'm not saying this organization has that psychological ability, magical ability, but in my mind, if we go that direction, to answer your question earlier, I don't know that it really goes away. I think it may have a long-term role, and it will evolve. That role will evolve. It will not be static. It can't be something that just sits here and says, we're here to define and address this problem. It's something that really addresses a variety of needs, issues, and concerns.
Well, and can be flexible enough to address the needs as they come. That's the beauty of a community development organization, is because if they're in touch with the community, then they're able to respond to those needs and make sure that the community is part of the solution. It's not like somebody's going to come in and go, I have a CDC and I'm here to save you. It doesn't work that way.
And I'm going to throw this last piece out there and then shut up.
No, this is
okay.
Dialogue.
So the last piece that I want to bring in, because it's pseudo personal, if you will, because I'm not from Old Town Ellicott City. I grew up in Columbia. I now live in further west in Ellicott City, but it's always sort of been there as a part of my growing up. And I was sharing with Beth, who apparently lives in Roger Carter's former home, that he was my bus driver when I was a kid. So there's all these little connections.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Bill Withers brought up last week was the notion of the number of people who at one time or another had generational homes in Howard County that they have lost. And part of it due to gentrification, part of it because of the flood. But at the end of the day, there's a very rich African-American history in Ellicott City that also seems to be sort of fading into the backdrop. And to sort of reignite that interest in what once was in Ellicott City and how that's contributed to the existence of the city, all the way down to the Ellicott brothers being abolitionists. And just having those sorts of things to re-attract people from various, and to, again, feed into, not to go back to preserve the history and yet take it to a place that has maybe never been before.
Well, I'll talk about Cambridge again. right? I mean, the classic is what they're doing now with the Harriet Tubman Museum just down the way, right? Is really saying, we value the history that is part of the Eastern Shore, and really trying to and doing more of that. So it's not just Harriet Tubman, but there's all kinds of more celebratory, not just about her, but all kinds of other people that are historic, there. So I think it's possible. It takes work, and it takes willingness of folks who typically don't think that it's important to preserve that heritage to actually preserve that heritage. Oh yeah, it takes work. But a community development organization, if done right, can really be intentional. That's what the really good, successful ones are, very intentional about what they're doing. Really try to address the needs, balance various views, try to find commonality, and then work towards whatever that goal is.
So Mike, we've heard about other organizations working in the community. We've heard about what community development organizations do. And part of the charge of this committee, as I understand it, is to determine not only if one's needed, but if one is needed, should it be within an existing organization or should it be within a new organization? And Matt's presentation on ECP, which was really good and really gave us background on it, made it clear, and I think he even said, like, what this CDC or CDO might do was not part of the plan, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be part of the plan.
No, I mean, we have to certainly, right?
Right, well, and so what, I mean, I know I'm
change
kind of putting you on the spot, and I don't expect you to actually answer this, but, I mean, it sort of seems like, the elephant in the room is that ECP, if it's going to be in an existing organization, I don't know who else it would be other than maybe EDA or something like that, but it seems like ECP is probably what we're all talking about when we say existing organization. Maybe I'm wrong. But when do we get to that point in having that frank conversation, and would ECP even be in a position by the termination of this committee to say, yes, we want to stand up and do it, or no, we don't? We do think it should get into another organization. I mean, I feel like we're getting to the point where we've heard enough about what the landscape is and about who the players are to start asking someone to call the question about, does it make sense? And I mean, it's almost.
Well, can I offer another alternative?
Yeah.
So it's typical for community development organizations to grow from an existing entity.
Right.
So not that an entity has to be a part of it or join, but like and we actually advise that a startup organization actually happen from an existing organization, because that existing organization has the infrastructure, the balance sheet, all of that stuff. It could be the Community Action Agency, it could be ECP, it could be us, it could be, it could be any very nonprofit group that already exists to help frame it up. And then when it's ready and when the community is ready, send it on its way or continue, depending on how the structure is of the organization. But either way, it has to start from another organization, because it's really hard to just put the 501c3 papers in and hope that money falls from the sky.
Right, and we've seen, and we've been we've been fiscal sponsors of many organizations and helped launch organizations. So I mean, there's that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly, so first of all, I clearly have to, I couldn't represent my organization without assembling my board and all that sort of stuff. We'd have to change our mission and bylaws, including with the IRS, and this is a little bit outside of the current mission statement. If we're talking about owning property or being a revolving loan organization, so we don't own property and we are not a lender. But, we've talked a lot about what's the problem we're trying to solve. And I'm not saying that those aren't the problems we're trying to solve. I do think that there's still, I'm still sort of trying to let this all wash over me and kind of come up with what are we actually missing here in Ellicott City. But look, I mean, we were born of existing organizations because it seemed to be the right thing to do to pull us together. EDAs, we heard from Larry Tweel, wanted us to exist because it allowed EDA to leverage what it was trying to do in the state and so on and so forth. You know, we've certainly served as, I'd like to think that we've served as a connective tissue, certainly for the 2 floods, unfortunately, a little more than, you know, not because of us, but because, man, if we only didn't have to do this, right?
Right.
And I would imagine it's playing some sort of connective tissue role no matter what.
Yeah,
I mean,
I was just also going to say, it also puts you in a tough position, to her point about giving birth to another organization where you guys haven't, I think Tom Cole said, like, you guys haven't had a real normal fiscal year ever.
That's right.
Like, are you even
Yeah.
in a position?
Yeah, so like,
Right.
so like when you talk about infrastructure and balance sheet and that kind of stuff, I mean.
Oh, yeah, I mean,
sort of like-
right, that's right. So
that's
we
not-
certainly
that's not
have our
perfect for you guys
501c3s,
right
certainly
now.
we,
Yeah.
you know, we get our regular audits and blah, 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 blah. But yeah, we're, you know,
That
one year we
struggle-
had an extra $1.8 million because we raised it on behalf of our constituents,
And then
but then
gave
we
it
got
away.
out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you know, there is some thought that has to go in, just from our perspective, let alone from the perspective of this committee and the county.
Yeah.
Perhaps even.
It just occurs to me because we hear so much about, and particularly from Odette, about all the other main streets across the state who are engaged in some kind of this work. So it seems like a
And
pretty
I think
obvious
there's an
question. to
EDA
ask.
role too, and like, so how, you know, what, I mean, I think there's a lot of moving parts here that
Yeah.
we're, I think, steps 1, 2, and 3, and I totally agree that we need to start thinking about this. This to me seems a little more in the 20s, but, you know, how we're going to actually do this.
We're going to get there fast, man.
Are we?
I mean, since you brought it up, when we said organization, I have not thought of the ECP as being that organization, and that's just my my take.
So that's my bias then too.
But I do find it kind of wild that we have been meeting for as long as we have, and I understand, you know, we're getting an education here, so I would just be happy if we paid somebody that could go after like 8 bajillion funding sources that apparently are out there and just have an application and you fill out. And like, how is all this money just sitting around and like it's not accessible to us?
Not really, I mean, there's lots of
that.
groups doing it.
We're trying.
You need that group, you need some, yeah.
There's got to be a vision. You've got to sell the vision
You have a
first.
vision.
Well, I
and
mean,
you have a-
I'm not saying like this is the, you know, this is the solution. I'm like, didn't have any idea we had a CDBG. How much money is that? Where is that earmarked in our budget? Who gets it? Who manages it? I mean, that's money coming directly to our county. Like, that's pretty simple, right? Like, doesn't get much less complicated than that as far as I am concerned in this arena. But
Somebody's got to do it.
And-
Yeah.
That's where it gets tough.
No,
And you guys
and EDA is going to certainly play a role.
That's
He's gonna come up with
Right.
it.
You need a team and with
To-
the,
to-
you with the development person who has that savvy ability to do that, to elevate your needs above everyone else and competes with other places and to have, and to,
I mean, Ellicott City can make the case.
Yeah.
It's super easy about why all these funds are needed and what needs to be done. You know, it's a matter of getting somebody to do it. And you've been trying to talk for a while, I'm so sorry.
I'm not sure how familiar you are with Ellicott City. In the past, we went through a process to create a master plan. It was a master plan for Ellicott City watershed, not just Main Street. It's not Main Street centric, although a lot of the opportunities they identified are in along Main Street. Ellicott City is rich in a lot of resources, rich in people and organizations in place. It's also fairly rich, in my experience, in real estate holdings in critical locations, like the courthouse. So I'm interested kind of in the CDC because I think it needs oversight, a master plan, and how do you implement this? It's not something that gets implemented in a few years, it takes a long time. Part of the challenge is to create a strategy. Where do I start? What's the next step? What's the next step? And then a lot of discussion about funding and financing and whatnot. And that to me speaks to, wow, there's got to be a small group of people and that's what they're doing. They're dedicated to that. And it really comes down to the director. What's the skill set for the director to take advantage of these resources? Because part of it is just the presentation. Things are happening in Ellicott City, and not in a reactive way, in a proactive way, long-term, down the road. This is a piece, it's going down there. We're on our way. It's part of that roadshow.
I have somebody in mind, that would
And so,
I know somebody who would do
I'm
it.
curious about the CDC aspect of it, and having the ability to create, own land, sell land, create partnerships, facilitate, really facilitate, like, not administrator, facilitate, like a builder or developer.
Right. Mhm.
And, you have to have a plan, you have to have a vision. Where are we going? We've got one tentative, hopefully it gets adopted. And that some kind of organization could help oversee full-time, dedicated to the management of the implementation of that master plan.
Well, so there's a couple of things there. One is that in a master plan situation, it's generally done through the Department of Planning, and so the jurisdiction does a lot of work to do that implementation. But it definitely takes partnerships, right? I mean, there's different groups that can have different pieces of that to help with that implementation. And if done right, then all of the stakeholders are buying into the plan, and so we'll do their part, right? So there isn't actually just one entity there's parts of the plan that would belong to, the Main Street and some to others. So, I think it just takes a lot of people to do that.
But they're going to talk to each other.
Right, well, community development organizations, good ones, are really, the ones that facilitate development are really good at the partnership development piece, and about convening the players and making sure everybody stays on task, and bringing in the resources and all of that. So it may not always be related to the master plan, but certainly has it in the back of their mind in terms of, because the master plan is a 10, 20-year plan. So the community development organization always has the future in mind, but also ears on the ground in terms of what's going on.
We have that in place.
Yeah, so, it's important.
And just to add to that, my comment about the master plan focuses on the watershed. And environment is it's just a critical piece of Ellicott City. You can't separate the urban history, community aspect without this physical study. Is there precedent? Does this make sense? Because it's not Main Street, it's the community, which to me is
Well, again, I
watershed.
think that, the community development organizations work to help meet the needs of the community. So part of it is like, you're going to need to define your area of where this entity would be surveyed. And certainly the stormwater issues and all of that are probably going to end up having to be something that the group deals with, but not doing it, right? That's a government function, but certainly to help push government to make it work, push, and maybe facilitate that
Well,
piece.
they need to be part of the conversation because the government has a history of being very clumsy.
Right,
Point of destructive.
one role that we didn't talk about, that you are bringing up, that community development organizations do, is that advocacy piece.
Right.
And that interaction with government
Right.
to make sure that stuff is getting done, so permits are getting pulled and, that kind of thing. But it's not the only entity, right? This has got to be an entity that does organizing, so that, people are involved, and it's not just one group going.
Has the ability to do real estate.
Yeah, they've got to be flexible to the needs. And so that's why when we talk about community, there are some community development organizations that just do housing, and that's all they're going to do. And that's fine, that's what they want to do. But, there's others that understand that there's this flexibility that needs to be done, or they see a need and say, oh, well, nobody's doing home ownership counseling, we're going to go ahead and do it, and that's not even mission creep. That's not even mission creep, because community development is so broad, So I think that just has to be really flexible with that.
And the last question.
Yeah, sure.
There's an opportunity of resources on the Baltimore County side with tax income. In reality, it's part of Ellicott City. Is there precedent for CDC to be able to make those kinds of outreach?
So there's a group in, that spreads between Anne Arundel and Baltimore City called Greater Baybrook Alliance, and that was done purposefully. There used to be a community development organization on the Baltimore City side, and they decided that, the activity that's happening in Anne Arundel is impacting Baltimore City, and Baltimore City is impacting Anne Arundel. So this group actually is one of the only ones that's doing cross-jurisdiction. I mean, there's some groups on the Eastern Shore because it's rural and there aren't very many people, so they do work cross-jurisdictionally because it's the nature of the work. But just from an urban setting, that's the one that is Baltimore City and Arundel. So you could have something that works with Baltimore County. The interesting thing about Baltimore County is I was on Johnny O's transition team, and he wants to make sure there's a much more robust community development sector in the county. We have 3 community development organizations. And when you look at it, they're like, oh, you can have one there, oh, you can have one there, because there is such a need in some of those places. So I think there would be interest if you all thought that some of the boundaries needed to go into Baltimore County, that there could be some support in that.
I notice the hour is past 8:30. We are going to
This was
convene.
fun.
I want
Come back.
Please, thank you on behalf of everybody here. We really enjoyed the conversation, and we may welcome you back soon.
Well, and let me make this offer. I mean, there may be a point where you just have to have somebody who's going to come in, interview a lot of people, figure this out, come up with, okay, here's our recommendation. I don't know if that's something that you want, but I mean, we can either help with that or have somebody do that, or however you want it. Happy to be part of the ongoing process.
And is that a fee-for-service model with CDN?
Yes.
So, just that's one clarification.
Right, I understand.
Yeah, that's right. But
I understand.
we will reconvene a week from tonight, and I think where we were leading off, Ned, with your comment, I think it's a great subject for our next meeting. So let's talk about what exists and what might be, what we might need.
Thank you.
Think about that over the next week.
Thank you
Thank you very much.
for coming.